Hi, Bridget. This is Professor Evans with feedback on your SA2, the rhetorical analysis. So the first thing you're saying is like, well, this isn't my portfolio. That's the challenge. You turn this in as a Word doc. We may have already talked about this in our midterm. I can't remember exactly. But just as a reminder, part of the reason why this is a challenge for me is I can't actually do the screencast in a Word doc right here. So I had to cut and paste this into just a dummy portfolio I used to play with things and see how things work in education as well. But remember that in the future, if you don't submit things in the right fashion, I just won't respond to them anymore. And it'll end up being a breach of contract. So again, if you have questions, please talk to me. So starting with the feedback, we always kind of start off with the criteria for excellence for this one. Here we were looking for an introduction, a clear thesis, an effective argument, supporting specific examples, kind of a fairly narrow scope in terms of what we were looking at, rhetoric elements, maybe just one or two, but done really well as opposed to many in a kind of surface fashion. And then finally, not getting trapped into what Harris is writing or someone else is writing, their point of their essay. Yours is you're writing about rhetoric effectiveness of this article, so that's where your focus needs to be. So one of the first things I noticed is that you are thinking, obviously you read the prompt, and one of the elements of the prompt was talking about the fact to provide a brief summary of kind of what Harris is doing. So I think this is your summary section right here, I think is in a sense a little bit overwhelming the beginning of the paper. The good news is that you're kind of well over the word count for this assignment. Not that, as we kind of do additional revisions, often we go over the word count. But this is a place that I could easily think that you could edit this down. I think what you're trying to accomplish here is just basically set up what the argument is that Harris is taking a very kind of untenable position. He's talking about, I think that we need to be able to, to be able to be successful in the war on terror, we need to be using all the tools available to us, and one of these is torture, and it is. And then he argues his ethical point, and so that may be all that you really need to do here. So if the other thing that we're thinking of in terms of this introduction is some way that we would want to again kind of engage our audience, kind of put them into a context of what we're doing, but also why we're doing it as well. So here, I think that you're writing about rhetoric. So how does Harris use rhetorical elements in here to persuade an audience? And is or is it not effective? So maybe that's where you start right here. Something here about rhetoric. About maybe, I've suggested this to a couple of people, is that if someone is taking this really difficult position, maybe that's where you start. I'm pretty sure that in your conclusion, here, Harris isn't an idiotic writer. He knows what he's doing, will draw on the audience and give them a reaction. So maybe that's that kind of the genesis of the idea that you end up using for your introduction, is that, he's taking a difficult position, but he knows that if he does it in a certain fashion, he can win over his audience as well. So maybe that's the place that you start. And then you kind of maybe give us your thesis, where you're talking about that, and then come in and do a brief summary. And I think that kind of, remember, because an introduction is generally going to go from a large general idea to a much more specific idea. A lot of times we talk about it in like an upside down triangle. So from a big idea to a very specific idea. And usually that specific idea will terminate in your thesis as well. Your thesis here. Let's see. Let's talk about your thesis. It's obvious to the audience on why he makes his opinion, constantly reflects his own opinion throughout the emotions and logic. Ethos and logos. I'm wondering here, one of the challenges here is that you remember is that emotion is pathos. Ethos is the credibility. So I think you may have some problems with your terminology here as well. I also kind of like this idea. This is very similar to what we talked about in the Levine essay, is that Harris does seem to be kind of yelling a little bit. But I think you're kind of just saying that he is. He's saying, points to this tone that he's yelling at the reader. Multiple of his points include, if you believe this, you must believe that, and so on, which also seems kind of logos. is very, if his tone throughout the essay is, not if, very angry. From the quote, the control, so I think you need to, if you're going to say that his tone is angry, you need to look at specific words, literally kind of put them in parentheses, be like, okay, he uses this word, this word, this word, and this word. As opposed to saying that it is angry. I think you need to demonstrate more how that is as well. Like this one, I think this is where you're doing this thing where you're thinking about italicizing the words right here to add emphasis to the points that you're making. I think works a little better. So if you transfer that idea up here and listed out your words specifically, I think that would work. The one right here where you're talking about Gandhi, you're saying this is logos. And I think what you need to do sometimes with logos is that you can't look at a single sentence. You have to look at a couple of sentences. So do you remember when we looked at our syllogism earlier in the quarter? So we had the, Socrates, all men or all humans are mortal. Socrates is a person. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. So if A is true, then B is true. If B is true, then C is true. So I think that if you had backed out slightly on the Gandhi one, you might have been able to do it, because I do think it is. Because he talks about this idea of, foreign policy would leave us something like the absolute pathicism, or that's not the way I'm saying it, of Gandhi. Only applies to a limited range of human conflict. So he's then drawing this. When it is not applicable, it seems flagrantly immoral. So then he's saying, well, if it's like this, it must be. So then he talks about Gandhi's remedy for the Holocaust, which is that the Jews should have just killed themselves, and therefore it would have drawn attention to Nazi Germany as well. So this is totally logos as well, but you kind of need to explain out the multiple steps on it. So then it kind of ends up with that. No question, if all the good people of the world adopted Gandhi's ethics, the thugs would inherit the earth right there. So it kind of leads us to this logical conclusion, working through that as well. Let's see. And so, so then I think if you come back to this as well, that you're talking about that he's doing this, step by step to persuade people on a difficult point, I think that would work. All right, I hope this was helpful.